This is one from Uptime Institute. They do a survey every year. And in this case here, what they're showing is the growth in rack densities from 2011 to 2020. And you show a per rack average kilowatts of about 2.4. And in 2020, the average was pushing up to 8.4. And to your point, Cary, typically it's looked at as saying, well, if you're in a raised floor environment, if you're once you start hitting that 5-6 kilowatt per rack heat load, then you get to the point where it's you should seriously be considering containment, because it does become more and more difficult to provide the proper inlet air to the IT equipment at that point in time. Now, Cary, you made a point about even at three kilowatts, it's feasible to do containment as well. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, yeah. So over the years, we've seen projects that have attractive paybacks, even at 2 kilowatts a cabinet. And of course, 10 years ago, that was often the case because the cooling was just so inefficient. And so as data centers either sort of upgrade equipment or are just simply younger, right? So they have more modern equipment. Well, then that payback begins to sort of move up as the density chart moves up. However, in some architectures, especially now with folks using outside air and slab floors instead of raised floors, you're sort of obligated to do containment in order to manage the room at any density. Okay, so sometimes the site architecture will sort of dictate it, but one of the case studies we'll show later, there was a 2-year payback across several sites that had an average density of 2 kilowatts, right? But again, that was because the cooling units were really old and inefficient or way over provisioned. But so it is site specific, but generally that 5 kilowatt thumb rule is where we see most co-location providers in the States.
Right. We actually are going to try something new here. We have a polling question for the audience to get an idea of what's your average rack density in your sites.
Yeah, so we were curious about what people are experiencing for rack densities today, and across our 100 or so folks, the results were as follows. Only 3% of the people have rack densities of 0 to 2 kilowatts. 28% of our audience has rack densities of 2 to 4 kilowatts. 40% of our audience has rack densities of 4 to 6 kilowatts. And fully a third, 35% of our audience has rack densities of 6 kilowatts or more. So interesting. Thank you for participating in that. We were curious of how our audience looked.
So in light of that, with the original polling question that we had, where we had 38%, I believe it was, saying that we were looking at doing some containment installations this year, I can see people are certainly, data centers are getting to the point where it's, if they haven't already done some form of containment, it is, they're starting to cross that threshold where I'll say open air supply is not going to be meeting the requirements for their IT equipment. So they're going to have to look at some better alternative to ensure that their IT equipment is getting the right inlet temperature air for that.